Okay, welcome back. This is the final part of the presentation. We're actually going to do some portrait lighting patterns, and in the final part, I'm going to set up flashes, and you're going to see me work through an actual setup from scratch with dialing in the background light, setting up a key light, doing a one light shot, and then adding in a second light for a fill light, and then adding in a third light for a kicker light. And you'll get to see how everything gets set and dialed in one light at a time. We're going to start out showing the actual standard portrait lighting patterns with continuous lighting, just to make it easy for you to see. You're actually going to see through my camera, and I'm going to take some still shots to represent the lighting, and you're going to get to see where the lights are actually physically positioned so that you can get an idea of exactly what you want to do with positioning the lights to try and recreate these standard lighting patterns. The very first lighting pattern I'm showing you is a standard lighting pattern, but you're not going to use it for portraits very often. However, it can be used for very dramatic effect. It's called horror lighting, and you can see it's pretty much the same thing you do when you're around the campfire telling ghost stories. Put a flashlight under your chin. It's just a very low light shooting upwards into the face from below at an angle, and it gives you that very dramatic, very scary look. There you can see the result of taking a shot with the horror lighting. The lighting pattern you're looking at now is butterfly lighting, also known as paramount lighting. It's one of the most important ones that you'll use a lot in portrait photography. It also got the name paramount lighting from the Hollywood studio back in the day when they would photograph a lot of their stars for publicity photos, etc., with this lighting pattern. In fact, if you care to take a look from back in the day, Google Marlene Dietrich, and you'll see that 9 out of 10 images of her, no matter what pose she's in, are photographed with butterfly lighting, because she actually insisted on butterfly lighting for her photos whenever possible. You can see from this that there's a distinct shape under the nose, and that's the dead giveaway that you've got the butterfly lighting correct. It also does very well at sculpting the cheekbones and the chin line, as you can see in this image. I'm going to go ahead and take a shot. Now, something that you're going to see here, the way I'm doing this, I have this light on a stand, and it's practically in line with the camera. You can see that light stand on the left of the frame. When you shoot this way, you're going to have to crop that out, or you're going to have to zoom in really tight, get a tight crop on the head to keep that stand out of there. There is an option for getting that out of the way if you're willing to invest in something a little bit different as far as equipment goes, and I'm going to show you that right now. So something that can help you out, especially if you're working in a studio environment and want to be doing that, is a stand with a boom arm on it. You can see I've got a flash out here on a bracket on the end of the boom arm. When you do this, you need to counterbalance your boom arm. In fact, this is just ankle weights from the sporting good department at the store. It's plenty of weight to counterbalance any speedlight arrangement you might have out here. You also always want to sandbag your stand so that your stand doesn't tip over with anything you have going on out here. And then it's very easy to swing this boom arm around to any position you want, and now this stand is not in your way like we just had it a minute ago with that other light. Okay, back to showing you that butterfly / paramount lighting pattern again here. I'm gonna make a small adjustment with the camera. There we go. And I'm going to show you how to modify this lighting pattern now. A simple reflector will work for this. You can also put a second light underneath. When you put a second light, they'll refer to it as a clamshell lighting pattern, because your two lights are both angled at your subject like a clamshell, and your camera is shooting between them as though you're shooting through the hinge of a clamshell. Now I'm going to show you what happens when you simply put a reflector under there. So here comes the reflector underneath, and you can see that light fills in the shadow areas under the chin, under the eye sockets. Let's go ahead and lower that just a little bit so we can, so simply changing the distance of that reflector I'm going to back out here so you can see where that is. There's the reflector, and moving it up or down under the chin will simply give you more light or less light filling in those shadow areas there. I'll go ahead and give you a shot here to compare. Go ahead and pull it out right now. Take the reflector out. So we're going to go in tight here and no reflector. Now let's go ahead and have the reflector in. Lower it just a little bit for me, please. There we go. And now we're going to switch over and let you see the before and after. There's standard butterfly lighting, and now it has been modified with a reflector to be what we call beauty lighting. The next lighting pattern that we're showing here is loop lighting. This is a very flattering form of lighting. This is done a lot with female and males, but especially a lot with females. It will narrow the face and slenderize your subject when you're photographing them. I'm going to go ahead and take a shot here so you can see what that actually looks like in a still photo. I'm going to come back live here, and the reason this is called loop lighting is because there is actually a loop of light that connects from the cheek down to the chin. There is an unbroken rim of light there that comes around. In the camera's view here, it's very narrow because he has a mustache. If your subject does not have a mustache, that loop of light will be a little bit thicker, but you can see it is an unbroken rim of light that comes around as a loop from the cheek to the chin. You can see where the shadow of the nose is coming down. Normally, if there's no mustache like our model has here, that shadow of the nose is what you want to have to avoid intersecting with that shadow of light that comes around on the cheek that's on the far side of where the light is placed. The next lighting pattern, what we're actually going to do, we're going to connect the shadow of the nose to the shadow on the far cheek. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and show you what this looks like modified simply with a reflector or a second light on the other side. So now you can see those hard shadows on that far side are getting filled in a little bit. So you can bring in a little detail there and not have this look so dramatic. Although we were talking about the Hollywood style lighting before, and in the Hollywood style lighting, they really had some deep shadows going on with the shots they were doing and sculpting the face. They didn't do a lot of fill in the old Hollywood style lighting. However, this can be very flattering to fill that in and show a little bit more detail with your subjects. But this gives you an option to photograph both ways, with the fill and without the fill. It is very easy, as you can see, to just hand hold a reflector up there and adjust the position of that reflector to get the amount of fill that you want coming in into the shadow areas there. Hold that back just a hair, please. Come in just a bit. Right there. We're going to shoot that. So here you have it with some fill, and there you have it without. You can see the difference that a simple reflector will make in that shot. Now what we're going to do is we're going to transition from loop lighting to Rembrandt lighting. And what you're going to get to see is that the light stand itself is actually not going to have to move that far to achieve the change. If you want to imagine as you're doing this that there's a circular line on the floor moving around the subject, keeping the same distance, you're just going to pick up the light stand and move it around that circle. And what you want is the shadow of the nose to come around and intersect with the shadow on the cheek on the far side. Now, of course, when you're using a flash, you're just going to have to practice and get used to where the position is, move it to where you think, take a test shot, look, and maybe adjust your light or your subject's head position as necessary. So you see now we've created Rembrandt lighting. There's a shadow of light on the far cheek. The side of the face closest to the light is fully illuminated. There's no more loop coming around to the chin. The issue that we have right now with what I'm doing, a lot of people will do this when they start out. The light is pointed right at the model's face. It's practically pointed right into his eye right here. And the side of the head that's closest to the light has too much light on it. The ear and everything on that side of the head is illuminated at the same level as the front of the face. We talked about feathered light earlier with all those modifiers. This is where that comes in, and you use that edge, that transition zone, that feathered light. You actually want to aim your light kind of past the subject's face. So now, if you were to imagine a line coming out of the center of my light, it's about a foot in front of the model's nose is where that line is, and you can see that feathered transition zone of light coming across the side of the head. So right now the ear is completely illuminated, but I'm bringing that edge around, simply rotating the light on the stand until the ear is still illuminated, but not anywhere near the level of the face that we want to concentrate the viewer's attention on. Also, what this does, you can see when I'm pointing the light straight into the model, there's very little definition of this cheek line right here, but as I pull the light around and get that transition zone coming in, now the ear is still illuminated, but not as much, and now you can really start to see that we're helping to sculpt this side of the face with the cheek line as well, but still have light coming in. We've got the classic Rembrandt pattern with the triangle of light over here, the shadow of the nose touching the shadow of the cheek line over here. And you can see now, if we bring in a reflector, how you can do the same thing we did before, just fill in those shadows, popping a reflector in there, and getting an entirely different look. So let's go ahead and we'll get a shot. Rembrandt lighting with no reflector. And we're going to go ahead and get a shot with some reflection in there, filling in those shadows. So there it is, classic Rembrandt pattern, no fill, and Rembrandt pattern with some fill light. Now what we've done, we've moved the light around practically just exactly around to the side of the model's head to create split lighting. Split lighting is pretty self-explanatory. You can see exactly what's going on. The face is split in half with a light on one side, shadow on the other. Doing it this way is a pretty dramatic lighting that you get if you let the shadows stay hard like that. And I actually see this done on a lot of album covers and things like that, where you want a lot of visual impact with what's going on. Now you can see, just as with all the other lighting patterns, you can use a reflector and bring in some fill and fill in that side of the face a little bit. And now we're going to go ahead and compare and see the difference. You've got straight up, very dramatic split lighting and adding a little fill. We're using reflectors for this, but you can always use a secondary light and get some real fine control with fill light for any of these patterns that we're talking about. I'm going to show you now variations in posing with the same lighting patterns. In this case, what we've done, the camera is in the same position, but we're turning the model in a semi-profile position. Now I'm going to show you here, it's very critical when you do this pose where the nose goes. What you're seeing right now is actually correct. The nose should stay within this cheek line. It shouldn't touch it and it shouldn't break it. It should be just within that cheek line. If you bring it out here to where it touches or where the nose starts to get in front of that cheek line, that's actually an incorrect position for the model. Now, eventually, if you go all the way, full profile, that's just fine. But semi-profile, with respect to the camera's position, you want to have the nose just inside the cheek line like that. Now, what we've done here, the camera and the model still have the same position with respect to each other. However, the model has just turned slightly away from the camera. The light is actually in the same position with respect to the model that it was to begin with. This is actually butterfly lighting. The light is right in front of the model and overhead, just like we did before, but you can see now that you have an entirely different look going on with the model's face. The model's face is very narrow, has become very slender. From the camera's position, the butterfly lighting looks much like the loop lighting that you saw, but you can see that shadow under the nose, directly under the nose. That's the dead giveaway, the position of the light, that this is butterfly lighting. Now, you'll also notice that what I'm doing is I can rotate the light around here and fill a little bit more in on the shadowed side of the face by bringing it around, or I can sculpt that side of the face a little harder with the light right there by rotating the light around. And you can see on the hair, on that side of the head where the ear would be, that transition zone, that feathered light that we keep talking about, where that's falling across the model's head. If you actually ever shoot with continuous light, it makes it very easy. If you're working with a flash, you do have to kind of dial in your positioning with some test shots. But this is butterfly lighting on the subject with the subject in a semi-profile pose. There's our actual photo with that. And we're going to go ahead and go back, and we're going to show a little fill light on that, as we've been doing with every other pattern so far, just so you can see what happens when you bring in a reflector. Bring that around a little more and bring it in closer to the model, just a little bit more. And I'm actually going to take the light, bring it around a little bit, and bounce a little bit off the reflector. There you go. There is some simple reflector fill on butterfly lighting with the model in a semi-profile pose with respect to the camera. Now I'm going to go ahead and continue to move the light around into the Rembrandt lighting pattern. You see that shadow of the nose coming around. I'm actually going to lower the light a little bit to help shine over the bridge of the nose and into that other cheek. We're going to see the shadow of the nose come around, and everything's going to close up there and leave that triangle of light on that cheek, which is the classic Rembrandt pattern. And now we're going to go ahead and shoot that. And we're going to bring in some fill and shoot that again, which this really pretty much needs some fill going on. We're going to adjust this here, right about there. And we're going to shoot that again. And now we're going to let you see that without some fill light and with some fill light. Even with the fill light, you can still see the sculpting of the cheekbones and that distinctive triangle of light on the cheek going on there. And finally here in the semi-profile pose, we've moved the light around again to produce split lighting. But you can see what a very different look this was versus the split lighting when the subject was facing directly into the camera. You just have a very narrow sliver of the face from the camera's perspective that's illuminated, and it looks very dramatic. Go ahead and take a shot. And once again, we're going to go ahead and add some fill and let you see the before and after of having a little fill put in there. So there we go with some very deep dark shadows, some very dramatic lighting. And again, with a little bit of fill coming in, but still not overpowering that primary lighting on the far side of the face that we've set up with the split lighting. The last thing I'm going to show you with these lighting patterns is, again, butterfly lighting. However, this is a full profile pose, but the light is back to that same butterfly lighting position with respect to the model. Everything is just changed with respect to the camera position. This is a very dramatic, very great looking lighting pattern right here. In fact, the lead-in shot that I put on the Strobist meetup site with the description of this original event that's how this photograph was shot, with this particular lighting pattern right here. Full profile, everything dark, and butterfly light on the model. We'll go ahead and take a shot. And there's what we actually have. Okay, now what we're going to do is tie this all together. We're going to do everything we learned in the first presentation I did with flash, and we're actually setting up a scene with speed lights and some modifiers, and we're going to start from scratch and dial in the background light. I've got just a dim light with a green gel on the background. You can see my camera settings. So basically, I'm going to go ahead and dial up my ISO. I've got my ISO set to 1000 and my shutter speed at 60. I'm keeping below the flash sync speed limitation of the camera, which is 250. As long as I'm below that, I'm good. I'm on a tripod. So I've dialed in the background light. So I'm going to go ahead and take a shot and let you see just what I have going on with the background lighting and nothing else happening. There you go. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to turn on my key light, which I currently have set in TTL mode, and I have it at TTL 0 compensation. No plus, no minus. It's just whatever the TTL system is going to think is the appropriate amount of light on the model. And we're going to take a test shot and see how we feel about TTL with 0 compensation. There you go. We can see that light is set up for Rembrandt lighting on the model. And TTL nailed it pretty perfectly. That's great exposure on the model. You see the background is still the way we set it up to be, with that green lighting for a nice color accent back there. I'm going to go ahead and show you what happens if we go ahead and adjust the TTL. I'm going to go ahead and just give you TTL +1. We're going to increase that brightness by 1 stop on the subject. As you can see, that's pretty bright. Probably wouldn't want to do that for anything. And I'm going to go ahead and dial that compensation down to -1, which might be nice. There's TTL -1. A little bit darker, a little more dramatic. I kind of like that because I'm going to be bringing in some additional lights now to fill. And I want those shadows nice and dark to start with and not being filled in at all from what's happening with my key light. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring in a fill light, where earlier in the demonstration we were using a reflector panel. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and actually activate a light that's in a softbox. By the way, that's what the key light is in. The key light is in a softbox, and it's an open softbox. There's no diffuser on it. I'll show you some photos of this setup so you can see, because I really want to control the feathered edge of that light. So I'm using an open softbox and using the hard edge of the softbox to control where the light is falling and not falling on the model. Same thing with the fill light that I have, that I'm going to turn on in this scene right now. The fill light is in an open softbox with no diffusion panel on it. And this is going to fill in the shadows on the opposite side of the model's head from the key light. So I've got that dialed in right now. This is going to be on manual power, by the way. I only want the key light to be on TTL because the other lights are hitting portions of the model that are going to be just very small portions of the scene being illuminated. And the TTL system is going to want to overcompensate because such a small portion of the model is being illuminated. And the TTL wants to bring that up to what it thinks is a proper exposure. And it will actually cause you to fight with your additional lights. So I run the key light on TTL, but the fill light and the kicker light that we're going to throw in a minute are on manual power that I can adjust, that I can simply adjust up and down from the controller that I have on the camera. So we're set right now. The fill light, I'm going to put it at the minimum amount of power and see where we're at and go from there. And by the way, I happen to know, because I do this a lot, this light is so close to the model to do what I want to do and to have the control with the power that I want. Minimum power, 1/128th, is going to be down near the threshold of where I want to be. So I actually have a 3-stop neutral density filter that we saw in the very first presentation that I did. That 3-stop neutral density filter is just taped onto the front of the flash head to give me a little more control. That way I can vary up and down and not necessarily be at the far end of the range of the flash at 1/128th power, which is as low as that one will go. But I'm going to go ahead and start there with that light, and we'll compare here. So here's our shot without that fill light. Here's our shot with that fill light coming in at 1/128th power. It's just starting to fill in those shadows. I think I want to go ahead and bring that up a little bit more. If I did not have that 3-stop neutral density filter, it would be a very different situation right here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this up from 1/128th, 1 stop, to 1/64th power. And we'll take a look at that. There's no fill. There's fill at minimum power. There's fill at 1 stop up from minimum power. I like that right there. So now you still see the Rembrandt lighting pattern on the model's face. It's still producing the Rembrandt pattern, but we have a fill light to the side of the model that's filling in those shadows. Now what I'm going to do is put a light back there, a kicker light. I have the strip light we saw earlier in the presentation with the egg crate grid snapped into it to really tighten up the lighting pattern and keep that pattern where I want it to be. This light is behind the model, and I don't want it spilling on the background, and I only want a little bit of light falling onto the model's hair. And we'll go ahead and activate that light right now. And I'm going to go ahead with that light, and I'm going to start it at the minimum amount of power as well, 1/128th. This does not have a neutral density filter on it. This light does have a diffusion panel and a grid in front of it, which is cutting down significantly on the amount of light coming out. So let's see what happens at lowest power with that kicker light coming in back there. There you can see we've got some really nice light coming in on that side of the model's head, on her hair, and even a slight bit of it is spilling around past the hair and sculpting the side of the model's head there. This is a really nice look, 3-light setup. Minimum power, 1/128th power on that kicker light in the back. Just a kiss of light into the hair, which is nice. And I brought it up a stop, and that puts a lot more light into the hair. This is a matter of taste. Some people may prefer this over what we saw before. That's actually not bad. And I'll go ahead, just so we can see, I'll bring it up one more stop. So there you have a pretty typical 3-point portrait lighting setup. We started out with continuous light on a background, dialed in the camera's exposure settings to get that existing light where we needed it to be. Then we brought in a key light on TTL, adjusted the TTL to preferences, brought in a fill light on manual power, got it adjusted appropriately for what we wanted for fill in the shadow areas of the subject's face. And then we brought in a strip light in the back as a kicker to throw some light in the hair, provide a little separation from the background on that side. You're looking at a diagram that shows you exactly what we did, and this diagram will be in the notes that are provided along with this presentation as well.